Thank you everyone for tuning in to the 2024 Food for Thought Juror Talk. I'm Amani Freeman. I'm the exhibitions manager for the Maryland Federation of Art, and today I'm joined by our juror, Miss Olivia Miller. She joined in 2012, was initially the coordination overseeing an education program with the Curator of Exhibitions in 2014. In addition to reinstalling the permanent collection galleries, Olivia has curated more than 30 exhibitions during her tenure. In 2021, the exhibition, The Art of Food, from the collections of the Jordan D. Schnitzer and his Family Foundation, was the UAMA's largest in over a decade and was accompanied by a bilingual catalog which will travel to other museums in Portland, Oregon, and Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Ms. Miller currently presides over Restored, The Return of the Woman Ochre, the William D. Koenig painting that was stolen in 1985 and recovered in 2017 and has once been restored and returned to the museum in 2022. Now I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Miller for some remarks.
I want to start off by saying what an honor it is to have had the opportunity to jury this exhibition for the Maryland Federation of Art Circle Gallery. I especially want to thank all of the artists for submitting their work. It isn't always easy to put your work out there in the world, especially for a juried show. So thank you all for taking the time to respond to the theme. The topic of food and art is near and dear to my heart. So as Amani described in the introduction, I did curate an exhibition about the art of food, which opened at the University of Arizona Museum of Art in 2021 and has been touring the country to different museums for the past few years. And one thing I love about exhibitions about food is that they never get old, really, because everyone has a relationship with food. Food is integral to cultures. There's so many different ways that we think about food in our lives apart from just sustaining our physical bodies. And so it's something that artists have always and will continue to always respond to. And so I think it's a subject that museums and art centers and galleries can always revisit, and there will always be new types of images to think about. It's also a great theme because it brings together artists who wouldn't necessarily exhibit together. So it brings together artists who work in different mediums, artists from different cultures, from different generations. And so it's just a nice broad theme that I think lends itself to a lot of different possibilities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my process in jurying the show, so that everyone has an understanding of how the decisions came to be, how particular artworks were chosen for the exhibition, and in particular, how the awards were decided. I really enjoy the jurying process. It's a chance for me to get out of my day-to-day routine here at the museum and to see what artists in other parts of the country are doing. So I find it really fun. It can be kind of difficult, though, because the process is somewhat subjective. With that said, I do try to balance my initial reactions to the work with some concrete criteria. So when I'm going through the submissions, I am looking for specific things. I'm looking for technical skill, creativity, originality, and overall presentation of the work. And there are certain questions that I ask myself as I go through the entries that help sort of guide my thoughts around it. So first and foremost, what is my overall reaction to the work? You know, does it catch my attention? Why does it catch my attention? What are the elements from the work that are drawing me to it? I also, very importantly, is the artist responding appropriately to the exhibition theme, or is it wildly off topic? None of the entries were off topic in this particular show, but it's important to ask yourself that. Does the work demonstrate risk-taking or a new point of view? How does the artist interpret the exhibition theme? How is the artist handling the medium? And in some cases, I will weigh these criteria more heavily than others. So for example, if I see something where it really seems like a new take on a subject, it's something I've never seen before, but maybe the artist still needs some more formal or technical training, that element of risk-taking will sometimes outweigh that need for more advanced technical skills. And so I do try to strike a balance between that. And then I mentioned how the work is presented. So for an in-person show, is the artist following the requirements that were put forth in the call to artists? So, for example, if the gallery is asking that the work come ready to hang, is it ready to hang? And is it presented professionally? Is the mat clean? Is the frame clean? So things like that. For a virtual exhibit like this, is it a high enough quality image for me to be able to take into consideration the work, or is it pixelated to the point that it just can't realistically be shown on an online platform? So those are all the things that go into the process. So with that, with my background and the background on my approach to the exhibition, I'm excited to talk about the winners of the awards. So I'm going to start with three honorable mentions. This work is steak pommes frites. I was instantly drawn to this work, most likely due to the very strong graphic appeal that it has to it. So we have that dark red wall in the background, the checkerboard pattern, and then we have this very sort of confronting cow that's staring right at us as the viewers. And so overall, it was a work that really grabbed my attention. I also like artwork that is kind of funny or quirky, and I do see a certain charm to this particular work. I think works like this, they have the potential to be read in a number of different ways. And the way I have interpreted this piece, which may or may not be what the artist intended, is for us to recognize the individuality of animals. I don't necessarily see it as a critique of eating meat, but I rather just some awareness to the animal. On the wall, we have a sign with the day's special, steak pommes frites. And we have the fries that are right below the little table. And the cow itself is standing in as the steak. So again, bringing back the concept of the animal or this individual life. It's also just kind of a sweet and funny cow to me, standing there, very sort of matter of fact and staring again directly at us as the viewer. But what I like about that is that it creates this exchange. There's a path of communication because it's acknowledging us as the viewer and is aware that we're staring at it. So it gives this animal a sense of consciousness, which I think is really nice. This artist, Chris Ann Farher, did submit two other possible works for entry that also included cows. I ultimately chose this one for the honorable mention because I liked the pose of the cow. So one of the things that I look at is technical skill. And in this case, the artist chose a very challenging point of view. They chose to, rather than show the cow in profile, which is an easier way to depict most things, they chose to foreshorten the cow. And so that requires, a handling of light and dark and really shaping the form to make it look like it's projecting out in 3 dimensions. And so I thought that that was a really nice representation of that. So the next award for honorable mention is for Onions 5. And so initially when I was in the jury portal, I see a screen of thumbnail images and I'm able to go in and click on each image and get a bigger perspective of the work. So, but I could tell even just from the thumbnail image of this work that this artist knows watercolor and is very clearly skilled in the watercolor medium. So it caught my attention immediately. What I love about this work is that the artist is able to say a lot with very little. And what I mean by that is that in relation to the size of the paper, there's actually very little paint used in this work. And so the artist has shown really great restraint with providing the viewer with a lot of information, but actually using not much paint, not much material, in very few colors. And so I find that just a very smart way to represent these onions. But what I love about it is that we still have all the information we need. So we still get the form, we get the light, we get the shadow, we get a lot of the sense of the texture, that sort of crispy onion layer skin that we see. And I think the artist also was strategic in how she was able to employ the use of the white paper and have it not just be background. So the highlights of the onions, she's just letting the white paper be there and do its thing. And so it becomes kind of an active participant in it. It's hard to tell from this image, but there's also really delicate and again, very restrained use of the color purple, which gives it some visual interest and is just a really lovely effect. So I really like this work. It's not a photorealistic work, but it's very naturalistic. And it again, it gives us the essence of all of these onions. And I think it's just a beautiful piece. So the last honorable mention goes to Beth Schwartz for this work, Kitchen Kitsch, which is a mixed media collage. I always appreciate a good collage. I think it's partly because I find the collage process to be a bit deceiving. And what I mean by that is that because you're often working with found materials, it seems like it should be easy, but you actually need to have a really strong eye for color and a really strong eye for composition to make a collage that actually works. And you also need to have a very careful hand, especially when you're dealing with fragile or vintage ephemera. And then there's the challenge of mixing materials. And this particular artist used both found elements, these mid-century images, but also incorporated paint in it. And that can be a real challenge for collage to have all of these elements work harmoniously together. But I think the color palette she used for the paint works really well with the images. And so it does work well together in this work. So it's a medium that I have repeatedly tried to use and one that I'm just not very good at. I never quite get it right. So whenever I see a good collage, I'm always a bit envious, but also really pleased to see when artists are able to get it right. The other reason why this work stood out to me is I just find it really funny. It's very quirky. The images that the artist has used and the way that she's put them together, they're a little bit funny. They're a little bit disturbing. The whole thing is just kind of strange, and I find it very fun. I think this is one that viewers could spend a lot of time with and come up with a lot of different interpretations. And I like that element where there are things to be found in it, but it's not going to make it so easy for you to figure it out right away. One of the things that I think is really interesting is the use of the black shapes in the background because they look almost like they're letters and that they should spell something. So it's something that, again, I think creates a lot of visual interest without giving the meaning away right away. And then I just also liked the way the composition came together. Rather than showing this as a square, the artist has tilted it and turned it into a diamond. So that automatically gives it some visual interest to it. And then there's these really subtle elements like the girls sitting on the pie, like it's a magic carpet. And the artist has slightly tilted that pie. So it's slightly off kilter. And that makes it so that it looks like it's in motion. And so you can just tell that the artist paid a lot of attention to detail in this work. So I'll now move on to 3 Jurors' Choice Awards. The first one I'll discuss is Berry Jam. So this is a textile work. And this is another one of those pieces that in the thumbnail, I could tell it was a really interesting piece and I was drawn to it. Part of it, of course, was the color. The color is just very vibrant. I think the artist made interesting color choices, mostly working with analogous colors. So like the reds and the oranges and the yellows, but then very strategically put in these cool colors and you can see those blues coming through. And so it creates a lot of that visual interest in the work. The other reason why I really liked it is it's always nice to see textile pieces. I think that we still don't see enough textiles in art shows, so it's always nice to have some represented. But it made me curious about the artist's process because when I look at this work, it is a textile piece, but in particular, those red rectangles, the long rectangles hanging down, it almost looks like a woodcut process. And so it makes me wonder, does the artist print onto the fabric before she puts all of the elements together? So it made me curious about that. And there's other elements that might be hard to see in this image, but the areas in the background that have the yellow crosses, there's also really delicate stitching overlaid on top of those areas that doesn't outline the cross shape. It's just another added element over it. So I just feel like there's a lot going on here. And then of course the black and yellow sort of angular lines, again, it provides a lot of movement around the piece and then I think the title Berry Jam is just perfect for it. Another work that I chose for Juror's Choice is Stone's I'm assuming that the artist meant to write stone soup, because of the theme is of course about food, but I do think that the title could be read either way, stone soap or stone soup. Both have layers to them. I'm going with the stone soup analogy. When I first saw this work, I didn't know the title. So that's another thing I should have mentioned in my introduction, that when I jury the show, I try to look at the artwork first and just get my initial reactions to what it looks like before I try to think about the interpretation through the title. So for this work, I obviously knew it was abstract. It was beautiful. Just the wood is beautiful. You can tell that this artist has a familiar handling of the medium, but I wasn't sure if this is meant to be an abstracted pea pod or maybe a stack of dishes or something abstracted in that way. And then I read the title, and I read the title as stone soup, and then it added all these layers and meanings for me. So a bit of nostalgia, thinking about that folk tale of stone soup, and then thinking about this as kind of a deconstructed soup where we're seeing all of the ingredients kind of laid out and stacked up on top of one another. So I found it a really interesting interpretation, and one that could be familiar to a lot of people because it is such a popular folktale. And then the last juror's choice is Artichoke Field. So this is an archival digital print. And for this work, I was initially drawn in by the color palette and the lighting in it. I just found this work to be a really calm and soothing piece. There were a lot of still lifes, a lot of market scenes. There weren't a lot of images of cultivation. And so I thought that this was kind of unique among many of the entries that we had this scene of a field. So I was initially drawn into kind of the soothing factors of it, but I could also tell that the artist was strategic about how he organized the composition of the work. So it's a very still piece in that it doesn't seem like there's any wind blowing or anything like that. But the way that the artist has chosen to frame this image, there are these elements of implied lines which give visual movement to the piece. And what I mean by that is if you were to start in kind of the upper left-hand corner, you'll see that tree, and it sort of creates a step across the background with this tree line. And that carries your eye along with the clouds across the page to the right side. The other way I see it is also very balanced. It's almost perfectly divided into two triangles. From the upper left-hand corner, if you take that tree and you follow it down, that line of artichokes, it brings your eye down to the lower right. And then it kind of balances the two parts of the work. And so I think that is another way that it feels like a very soothing piece because the artist did make these compositional choices. The other thing that really intrigued me about this is that looking at it, it made me aware of how little I actually know about artichokes and their life cycle. I found out much later in life, I was an adult, that artichokes grow these very incredible purple flowers. And I didn't realize that before. But I also realized I haven't really thought about what the death stage looks like. And I think here we're seeing that, and they sort of resemble thistles. So then I went online. This piece made me very curious about artichokes. And then I realized they're all related. They're part of the same sort of family. And so I think the other reason why I like this work is that it reminds us to check in on the foods we eat. Where did they come from? Where are they grown? What is their life cycle? How do we get them to where we are? How did they arrive on our dinner plates? Who's doing the labor behind procuring food for us? And so this one image kind of sent me on this path to further exploration. And lastly, I'm very excited for the Best in Show work. This is Apple Diptych, An Uncertain Future by James A. DiPietro. Obviously, I love this work. I awarded it Best in Show. But the reason I did is that it instantly caught my eye. So again, as I was kind of going through the show, initially I was just scanning the entries with the thumbnails. And this is one that every time I scanned through, it kept catching my eye. And that's for a few reasons. So for one, I really like the still life genre. I'm drawn to them. This work also shows incredible technical capabilities. The artist clearly knows how to handle the paint medium. And then I also like that the artist took what is a very old tradition, still life painting, and did something interesting with it and did something new with the composition. So the artist has called this apple diptych, and a diptych normally implies that there are two parts to the work. And sometimes that can be two panels individually framed but exhibited side by side. Sometimes it can mean that they're conjoined panels. But what the artist did here was created sort of a trompe l'oeil effect. So, and that means to trick the eye. So he created these two separate images, but they're really all one, but he creates the illusion of it by having the sticks of the apples overlap the top image. So I found that part very clever and fun. So starting with the top in this basket of apples, we have what is a beautifully rendered basket with a lot of details. We have even the little staples used to hold the basket together, the shadow from that handle that's resting right below. And then the fact that the artist twisted the basket and made it slightly askew so that we're seeing it at an angle. You know, the basket handle is not perfectly centered in the image, which makes things more interesting. And then we're also seeing the seam of where the sort of wrap around the basket comes together and is stapled. And so that also creates an interesting effect with the shadow down below. So I loved all of those little details. And then of course it's brimming with these really perfect, appetizing looking apples at the top. And down below in the bottom register, again, we have that sort of illusory effect with the sticks rising above and intersecting the top canvas, the top part of the canvas. And then I found this part very fun. I interpret it as a continuous narrative. And what I mean by that is when I read this painting, I'm not seeing this as a representation of three individual apples. I'm seeing instead one apple that's shown in three different states of consumption. So on the left, it's fully wrapped in that cellophane, and then it's unwrapped, and then there's a bite taken out of it. So I see a sort of narrative happening there. Again, the artist has a really good handling of the medium, depicting that sort of crunchy cellophane or paper that it's wrapped in, the drips of the candy onto the sticks. You know, there's just a lot of really fun details in the work. But I think my favorite part of the work is actually the apple that has the bite taken out of it. And that's because the artist was very keen to put in these details the fact that that one bite has caused the apple to start to decay slightly. And it's very subtle, but you can see that those edges around the bite mark have started to brown and they're starting to pucker a little bit. And I really loved those details. And I thought maybe the artist was making a nod to the still life tradition, where in the Western European still life tradition, particularly in the Netherlands in the Baroque era, you have elements of the transience of life. So it could be flowers starting to die, fruits starting to rot, and it's this sort of reminder of that. So it made me curious if the artist was doing that intentionally. Either way, it made me think of that. So I loved everything about this work, and I was really delighted to award it Best in Show. So again, though, those are all the rewards. I really want to thank Maryland Federation of Art, Amani, of course, who is just really wonderful throughout all of this. And then again, I want to thank all of the artists for submitting their works. If you did not get selected for this show, I hope that you don't see this as the end of your artistic endeavors and that you continue to put yourself out there and submit works to show. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Miss Miller. It was a joy to listen to. It was a joy to work with you. As you all can see and tell, she knows her stuff and she's willing to talk about it. So it's always great when we have a juror that's really insightful and just is just pleasant. You know, it's nice. But that brings us to a close today, everyone. This show will be on display for the month of July and August. So give it a look on our web gallery, share it with your friends, and yeah, we'll be uploading this shortly. So take care.